The gunshot echoed across the valley before Vivian Mercer even saw the man who would change her life forever. She'd been in Red Hollow less than 24 hours when she rode onto the wrong land, crossed the wrong fence, and found herself staring down the barrel of a rifle held by the most dangerous man in New Mexico territory. Silas Creed didn't smile, didn't lower his weapon, just stood there like judgment itself, waiting for her to run, but Vivian had nowhere left to run to. If you want to know what happened next, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rattled into Red Hollow on a Tuesday that felt like the world was ending. Dust devils twisted across the main street, scattering grit against the false-fronted buildings that lined the road. Vivian Mercer pressed her face against the window, watching the town materialize through clouds of brown earth. It looked exactly like what it was, a place people ended up when they'd run out of better options. "Red Hollow," the driver shouted, yanking the brake. "End of the line, miss." Vivian stepped down onto ground so dry it cracked under her boots. The spring of 1882 had brought no rain to this part of New Mexico territory, and everything showed it. The few trees along the road stood skeletal and gray. What passed for grass crunched like paper. Even the people moving along the boardwalks looked weathered, their faces carved by sun and wind into expressions of permanent weariness. She had $43 in her pocket, 2 carpet bags, and a letter from a man named Elias Boone offering her $20 a month to tutor his sons. It wasn't much, but it was something which put it ahead of everything she'd left behind in Philadelphia. "You sure about this, miss?" The driver was already unloading her bags, but his tone carried doubt. "Town like this ain't exactly hospitable to young women traveling alone." "I'll manage," Vivian said. She'd been managing for 6 months now, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation ruined by his business failures. A woman alone with no money and no family didn't have the luxury of being particular about where she landed. The driver tipped his hat and climbed back onto his seat. Within minutes, the stagecoach had disappeared back down the road, leaving Vivian standing in the middle of Red Hollow, with her bags at her feet and the entire population of the town watching her from windows and doorways. She picked up her bags and started walking. The Boone Ranch lay 5 miles east of town, according to the letter. Vivian had hoped to hire a wagon, but the livery stable was closed, its doors chained shut. A faded sign read, "Water dispute, no business until further notice." Water dispute. Vivian had heard those words before. In dry country, water meant everything. Men killed over it. Whole towns died without it. She was adjusting her grip on the heavier bag when a voice called out behind her. "You the new teacher?" Vivian turned. A boy of maybe 14 stood in the doorway of the general store, all elbows and sun-bleached hair. "I'm here to tutor the Boone children," Vivian said. "Same thing." The boy jerked his thumb toward the east. "Pa's ranch is out that way, but you won't make it on foot, not carrying all that. I can get you a horse." "I have very little money." "Didn't ask for money. Asked if you needed a horse." 20 minutes later, Vivian was mounted on a rangy mare that looked as tired as she felt, following the boy, whose name she'd learned was Daniel Boone, along a road that was little more than 2 ruts in the hardpan. "You really from Philadelphia?" Daniel asked, glancing back at her. "I am." "Why'd you come here?" "I needed work." "Could have found work lots of places better than Red Hollow." "I'm sure that's true," Vivian said, "but this is where the letter reached me." Daniel rode in silence for a while. The land stretched out in every direction, vast and empty except for distant mesas that shimmered in the heat. Vivian had never seen so much space in her life. In Philadelphia, everything had been crowded together: buildings, people, noise. Here, the silence was almost physical. "You know about the trouble?" Daniel asked finally. "What trouble?" "Between Pa and Silas Creed." Daniel said the name like it tasted bad. "Pa says Creed's stealing water from Cottonwood Creek, damming it up on his land so it don't reach ours. Been going on 2 years now, getting worse." "Is it true?" Daniel shrugged. "Pa thinks so. Everybody thinks so. Creed don't exactly defend himself, just sits up there on his ranch and don't talk to nobody." "What do you think?" The boy looked surprised to be asked. "I think it don't matter what I think. Matters what the men with guns think." They crested a low rise, and Vivian saw the Boone Ranch spread out below. It was larger than she'd expected. A main house, 2 barns, several outbuildings, corrals that stretched into the distance. But everything looked parched. The grass in the near pastures had gone yellow. Cattle clustered around a water trough that appeared to be only half full. "That's home," Daniel said. "Such as it is." Elias Boone met them in the yard. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with gray threading through his dark beard. His handshake nearly crushed Vivian's fingers. "Miss Mercer, glad you made it. Was starting to think you'd changed your mind." "The stage was delayed," Vivian said. "Stage is always delayed. Come on inside. You must be half dead from the heat." The house was cooler, but not by much. Boone's wife had died 3 years earlier, he explained as he showed Vivian to a small room off the kitchen. Since then, he and the boys had been managing as best they could, which meant the house had the slightly chaotic feel of a place run by men who didn't quite know what they were doing. "You'll teach Daniel and his brothers," Boone said. "Reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever else you think they ought to know. Lord knows they need civilizing." "How many brothers?" "3. Daniel you've met. Marcus is 12. Joseph's 9. Good boys mostly. A little wild. I'll do my best, Mr. Boone." "Elias," he said, "we don't stand on ceremony out here. You want some water? Got a pitcher in the kitchen." Vivian accepted gratefully. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was wet, and that was all that mattered. "I'll be straight with you, Miss Mercer," Boone said, leaning against the kitchen table. "This ain't an easy place. Drought's got everyone on edge. Tempers are running hot. There's talk of violence if the water situation don't improve." Daniel mentioned a dispute with someone named Silas Creed. Boone's expression darkened. "Creed? Yeah. Man's a curse on this valley. Built his ranch upstream and choked off the creek that feeds half a dozen properties, mine included. Won't negotiate. Won't even talk. Just sits up there on his land like some kind of king and watches the rest of us die of thirst." "Have you tried reasoning with him?" "Reasoning?" Boone laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't reason with a man like Silas Creed. He's not interested in what's fair or right. Only what he can take." Vivian wanted to ask more, but Boone's 2 younger sons burst into the kitchen at that moment, arguing loudly about something involving a rope and a fence post. The conversation shifted, and by the time Vivian had been introduced to Marcus and Joseph, the subject of Silas Creed had been dropped. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the wind scrape against the house, Vivian thought about what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't just about teaching 3 boys their letters. She'd landed in the middle of something bigger and uglier, a conflict that could turn violent at any moment. But she'd made her choice. There was no going back now. The first week passed in a blur of lessons and adjustments. The boys were smarter than they pretended to be, but they'd been running wild for so long that sitting still felt like torture to them. Vivian quickly learned that if she wanted their attention, she had to earn it. "Why do we need to know about history?" Marcus asked on the 3rd day, when Vivian was trying to teach them about the Revolutionary War. "We're ranchers. What good is knowing about dead people? Because if you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat it," Vivian said. "That's just words." "Is it? Your father is fighting with Silas Creed over water. Do you think that's the first time neighbors have fought over resources? Do you think they'll be the last?" Marcus frowned. "So what? We're supposed to just let Creed steal from us because people fought in the past?" "No," Vivian said. "You're supposed to understand that conflicts like this have patterns. They escalate. They get worse. And if nobody's smart enough to break the pattern, people die." That got their attention. "You think somebody's gonna die?" Joseph asked, eyes wide. "I think men with guns and bad tempers make dangerous combinations," Vivian said. "And I think smart people look for solutions instead of just shouting at each other." Daniel, who'd been quiet until now, looked up from his book. "You ever met Silas Creed?" "No." "Then you don't know what you're talking about. Man's a stone. You can't negotiate with a stone." Vivian let it drop, but the conversation stuck with her. She'd heard Silas Creed's name a dozen times in her first week, and every time it was said like a curse. The villain of Red Hollow. The man who was killing the valley. She found herself curious despite everything. What kind of man inspired that much hatred? Blundek. The answer came on her 8th day in Red Hollow, when she made a mistake that nearly cost her. She'd borrowed the same mare Daniel had given her that first day, planning to ride out and see more of the country. Elias had drawn her a rough map of the property boundaries, but maps were one thing and land was another. Out here, where everything looked the same, it was easy to lose track of where you were. Vivian had been riding for maybe an hour when she noticed the creek. It was the first running water she'd seen since arriving. Not much, a thin ribbon winding through a shallow canyon, but it was moving, which meant it was still alive. She dismounted and led the mare down to drink, feeling something loosen in her chest at the sight of it. This must be Cottonwood Creek, she thought, the one everyone's fighting over. She was kneeling beside the water, refilling her canteen, when she heard the voice. "You're trespassing." Vivian jerked upright, water spilling across her hands. A man stood about 20 feet away, so still she hadn't noticed him until he spoke. He held a rifle. Not exactly aimed at her, but not exactly not aimed at her either. I'm sorry," Vivian stammered. "I didn't realize..." "Didn't realize what?" "That you were on someone else's land. I thought this was Boone property." "It's not." The man stepped closer, and Vivian got her first real look at him. He was tall, lean in the way of people who worked hard and ate less than they should. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. He wore work clothes, dusty trousers, a plain shirt, boots that had seen better days, and he moved with the kind of economy that suggested he never wasted motion. "You're Silas Creed," Vivian said, "and you're the new teacher at the Boone place." "How did you know?" "Small valley, word travels." He nodded toward the mare. "That's Daniel's horse. He loaned it to me." "And did Elias tell you to ride onto my land, or was that your own idea?" Vivian felt heat rise in her face. "He told me the boundaries. I must have crossed them by mistake." "Convenient mistake. It wasn't deliberate. Everything's deliberate out here. Nothing happens by accident." Vivian straightened, meeting his eyes. "I assure you, Mr. Creed, if I'd wanted to trespass, I would have done it with more purpose than accidentally watering a horse." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but close. "You always talk like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like you swallowed a dictionary." "I'm educated. Is that a crime in Red Hollow?" "Depends who you ask." Creed lowered the rifle slightly. "You working for Boone now?" "I'm tutoring his sons." "Same thing. Not even remotely the same thing. You're living in his house, eating his food, taking his money. That makes you part of whatever he's doing." "I'm teaching children to read," Vivian said. "I'm not taking sides in your water dispute." Creed studied her for a long moment. "You will. Everybody does eventually." "Then I'll be the exception." "There are no exceptions out here." He gestured toward the creek with the rifle. "This water you're standing next to? It runs through my land before it reaches Boone's. I got rights to it. He thinks I'm stealing. I think I'm using what's mine. There's no middle ground in that argument." "There's always middle ground if people are willing to look for it. That what they taught you in Philadelphia?" Vivian blinked. "How did you..." "Told you. Word travels." Creed stepped back. "You should leave now, before Boone gets any ideas about why you're up here." "I made a mistake. That's all. Mistakes get people killed out here." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the scrub brush so quickly it was like he'd never been there at all. Vivian stood frozen for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. That was Silas Creed, the monster everyone talked about. He hadn't seemed like a monster. Cold, yes. Suspicious, definitely. But there'd been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that wasn't quite hostility, more like wariness, like he was used to people lying to him and had stopped believing anything they said. Vivian mounted the mare and rode back toward Boone's ranch, her mind churning. She'd expected Creed to be cruel or violent. Instead, he'd been controlled, almost careful. What kind of man was he, really? And why did everyone hate him so much? She didn't mention the encounter to Elias, partly because she didn't want to worry him, and partly because she suspected he'd forbid her from riding out alone again. But the meeting stayed with her, surfacing at odd moments during lessons or meals. A week later, she was working in the small garden behind the house when Daniel found her. "Miss Mercer, Pa wants to talk to you." Elias was in the barn, checking the water levels in the main trough. His expression was grim. "Creek's down another foot," he said without preamble. "At this rate, we'll be dry in a month." "What will you do?" "What can I do? Creed's got the water and he's not sharing. We're dying of thirst while he sits up there fat and happy." Vivian hesitated. "Have you actually seen him diverting the water?" Elias looked at her sharply. "What kind of question is that?" "A practical one. If you're going to accuse someone of stealing, shouldn't you have proof?" "I got all the proof I need. Creek runs through his land first. It's full up there and nearly dry down here. What else do I need to know?" "Maybe he's using less than you think. Maybe the drought's hitting all of us," Elias cut in. "But somehow Creed's still got green grass, still got full water troughs. You think that's coincidence?" Vivian didn't have an answer to that. "I'm not a violent man, Miss Mercer," Elias continued. "But I got sons to feed, cattle to water, a ranch to keep alive. If Creed won't negotiate, I'll have to take other measures." "What kind of measures?" "The kind I hope I won't need." He walked away before she could press him further. That night, Vivian couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Silas Creed standing beside the creek, rifle in hand, looking at her like she was just another person come to take something from him. What if he wasn't the villain? What if he was just a man trying to survive, same as everyone else? The thought was dangerous. Disloyal, even. She was living under Elias Boone's roof. She owed him her job, her safety, her survival in this harsh place. But she'd spent too many years watching people rush to judgment, too many years seeing how quickly crowds turned on anyone who didn't fit their story. She needed to know the truth. The next morning, Vivian told Elias she was riding into town for supplies. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did need a few things from the general store, but her real destination was north, toward the high ground where Silas Creed's ranch sat. She found it after an hour of riding, following the creek upstream until the land began to rise. Creed's property was smaller than Boone's, but better kept. The fences were straight and well-maintained. The buildings, though simple, looked solid. And the grass, as Elias had said, was noticeably greener than anything in the lower valley. Vivian dismounted near the main house and waited. She had no doubt Creed had already seen her. Men like him didn't survive in country like this by being unobservant. Sure enough, he appeared from behind the barn within minutes. "You lost again?" he asked. "No, I came deliberately this time." "Why?" "To talk." "We don't have anything to talk about." "Don't we?" Vivian gestured toward the creek, which ran full and clear through his property. "Everyone says you're stealing water. I want to hear your side." Creed's jaw tightened. "My side doesn't matter. People already made up their minds." "I haven't. You will." "Why are you so certain of that?" He stared at her, and for the first time Vivian saw something crack in that hard exterior. Not much, just a flicker. But it was there. "Because everyone does," he said quietly. "That's how it works. Boone's lived here longer, got more friends, more money. When it comes down to his word against mine, nobody's choosing me." "So you're just giving up?" "I'm not giving up anything. I'm keeping what's mine. That water runs through my land before it reaches his. I got rights to it. If that makes me a thief, then I guess I'm a thief." "Are you damming it?" "No." "Then why is the creek running so low on Boone's land?" Creed was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, and some of the hardness left his shoulders. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you." He led her along the creek, walking in silence until they reached a point where the water split into two channels. One continued south toward Boone's property. The other curved east, disappearing into a dense thicket of cottonwood trees. "See that eastern fork?" Creed pointed. "That's natural. Been there since before I bought this land. But 5 years ago we had heavy rains, flash flooding. The eastern channel got deeper. Started pulling more water than the southern one." Vivian stared at the split. "You're saying it's not deliberate?" "I'm saying the land changed. Water follows the path of least resistance. I'm not damming anything. I'm not diverting anything. The creek's just doing what creeks do." "Have you told Boone this?" Creed laughed, but it was bitter. "You think he'd believe me? I tried talking to him 2 years ago. He called me a liar and told me to get off his property. Haven't tried since." Vivian looked at the creek, then at Creed, then back at the creek. If he was telling the truth, and everything about his demeanor suggested he was, then this whole conflict was built on a misunderstanding. "What if you redirected the eastern channel?" she asked. Build it in, water back toward the southern fork? Then I'd be giving up water that runs through my land, water I need for my own cattle. But if it stopped the conflict, I'm not the one who started this fight, Creed said, his voice hardening again. Boone decided I was his enemy before he ever bothered asking questions. Why should I sacrifice for a man who won't even speak to me? It was a fair question. Vivian didn't have a good answer. People are talking about violence, she said quietly. Guns. Maybe worse. Let them talk. You don't mean that, don't I? Creed turned to face her fully. You've been here, 2 weeks? You don't know these people. Don't know what they're capable of. I've lived here 6 years, and in that time I've watched this valley turn 3 men into corpses over disputes that started smaller than this one. So yeah, they can talk. When they're ready to do more than talk, I'll be ready too. That's not a solution. It's survival. They stood there in the harsh sunlight, the creek running between them, and Vivian realized she was looking at a man who'd given up on being understood. He'd built his walls so high and so thick that nothing could get through anymore. She recognized that fortress. She'd built one herself after her father died. I should go, Vivian said finally. Creed nodded. Probably smart. She started to turn away, then stopped. For what it's worth, I believe you. About the creek. He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Why? Because you have no reason to lie to me, and because you could have just run me off your land both times I showed up here, but you didn't. Don't mistake tolerance for kindness, Creed said. I'm not a good man, Miss Mercer. I'm not looking for good men, Vivian said. I'm looking for honest ones. She rode away before he could respond, her heart beating too fast and her thoughts tangled into knots she couldn't untie. Bumping. That evening, Vivian sat at dinner with the Boone family and tried to act normal, but her mind kept circling back to Silas Creed standing beside that creek, telling her a truth nobody else wanted to hear. You're quiet tonight, Elias observed. Just tired, Vivian said. Boys wearing you out? Something like that. Daniel watched her across the table, his expression thoughtful. He was a smart kid, probably smart enough to know she was lying. After dinner, she helped clean up and then retreated to her room. She pulled out the small notebook she'd brought from Philadelphia and started writing, trying to organize her thoughts. The conflict wasn't what it seemed. Creed wasn't stealing. The water was following a natural change in the land. If both sides would just talk, actually talk, not shout accusations, they might be able to find a solution. But how could she convince them? She was nobody. A tutor from Philadelphia with no standing in this valley, no history, no reason for anyone to trust her judgment. And yet she couldn't just do nothing, not when she'd seen the truth with her own eyes. A knock on her door startled her. Come in. Daniel stepped inside, looking uncomfortable. Can I talk to you? Of course. He sat on the edge of her bed, fidgeting with his hands. I saw you ride north this morning, toward Creed's land. Vivian's stomach dropped. Daniel, I didn't tell Pa, he said quickly, but I need to know why you went up there. There was no point lying. I wanted to hear Creed's side of the story. And I think your father's wrong about him. Daniel's eyes widened. You can't say that. I just did. No, I mean, you can't say that to anyone else. Pa's convinced Creed's the enemy. If he thinks you're siding with him, I'm not siding with anyone, Vivian said. I'm trying to understand what's actually happening. What's happening is we're running out of water. I know, but it might not be Creed's fault. She explained what she'd seen, the split in the creek, the natural changes that had redirected the flow. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from skepticism to reluctant consideration. Even if that's true, he said finally, Pa won't believe it. Not from Creed. Maybe not even from you. Then we need to find a way to make him believe it. How? Vivian didn't have an answer. Not yet. But for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, she felt like she had a purpose beyond just teaching children their letters. She was going to stop this conflict before it turned violent, even if it meant risking everything she'd built here. The opportunity came 3 days later when Elias announced he was riding into town for a ranchers' meeting. What kind of meeting? Vivian asked. The kind where we discuss what to do about Creed, Elias said grimly. He's had his chance to negotiate. Time for harder measures. What does that mean? Means we're running out of options. After he left, Vivian made a decision. She saddled the mare and rode hard for Creed's ranch, arriving just before noon. He was working near the barn, mending a fence, and looked up in surprise when she dismounted. "There's a meeting in town tonight," Vivian said without preamble. "The ranchers. They're planning something." Creed set down his tools. "I know." "You know? I've been expecting this for months. Figured it was only a matter of time before they decided talk wasn't enough. You have to go. Defend yourself." He shook his head. "Walking into a room full of men who want me gone? That's not defending myself, that's suicide." "Then what's your plan? Wait for them to come here?" "If they come, I'll deal with it." "With a rifle?" "If necessary." Vivian wanted to shake him. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Maybe. But I'll die on my own land, and they'll know I didn't go easy." "That's insane." "That's survival." Creed looked at her, and for the first time his expression softened slightly. "Why do you care what happens to me?" It was a good question. Vivian wasn't entirely sure of the answer herself. "Because I don't think you're what they say you are," she said finally, "and because I've watched enough good people get destroyed by lies to know how this ends if somebody doesn't stop it." Creed studied her face. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both." A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "Yeah, probably." They stood there in the yard, the sun beating down, and Vivian made another decision, one she probably shouldn't make, but couldn't seem to help. "I'm going to that meeting," she said, "and I'm going to tell them what I saw, the creek, the natural split, the truth. They won't listen to you. Maybe not, but I have to try." "Why?" "Because somebody has to." She met his eyes. "And because you deserve better than being murdered over a misunderstanding." For a long moment, Creed didn't respond. Then he stepped closer, close enough that Vivian could see the fatigue in his face, the weight he'd been carrying alone for too long. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "I know. This could cost you your job, maybe worse." "I know that too." "Then you really are foolish." "Probably," Vivian agreed. "But I'm going anyway." She rode back to Boone's ranch and spent the afternoon preparing. When evening came and Elias left for town, Vivian followed at a distance, her heart hammering and her hands shaking on the reins. The meeting was being held in the back room of the saloon. Vivian tied her horse outside and pushed through the doors, ignoring the stares of the men drinking at the bar. She could hear raised voices coming from the back. She walked in without knocking. The room fell silent. 15 men sat around a long table, Elias at the head. Every single one of them turned to stare at her. "Miss Mercer," Elias said slowly, "what are you doing here?" "I need to speak," Vivian said. Her voice shook, but she forced it steady. "About Silas Creed." "This isn't your concern." It is if you're planning violence." She stepped farther into the room. "I've been to Creed's land. I've seen the creek, and I think you're all making a terrible mistake." The room erupted. Men shouting, voices overlapping, accusations flying. But Vivian stood her ground, and when the noise finally died down, she told them everything. The split in the creek, the natural erosion, Creed's explanation. "He's not stealing from you," she finished. "The land is." "That's convenient," someone muttered. "It's the truth." Elias stood. His face was dark with anger. "You went to his land? Behind my back?" "I went to find the truth." "You went to betray the people who took you in, fed you, gave you work." "I went to prevent you from becoming murderers." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Nobody said anything about murder," Elias said. "Didn't you?" Vivian looked around the room. "What exactly were you planning to do? Run him off? Burn his ranch? Shoot him if he resisted? Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was going to end peacefully." Several men had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The fact remains," Elias said, his voice hard, "that we're dying while he prospers. Explanation or not, that's the reality. Then redirect the eastern fork of the creek. Force the water back your direction. It's possible. I've seen the terrain." "That's his land. His water." "Then buy it from him." negotiate, fun that doesn't end with blood. You don't understand how things work out here. I understand perfectly, Vivian cut in. I understand that you've decided Silas Creed is your enemy, because it's easier than admitting the real enemy is drought and bad luck and land that doesn't care about your plans. But I also understand that if you go after him, you'll have to live with what you've done for the rest of your lives. And I don't think any of you want that. Silence. Then one of the other ranchers spoke up. An older man Vivian had seen in town a few times. What if she's right about the creek? She's been here 2 weeks, Elias snapped. What does she know? Enough to look at the evidence instead of just assuming, the old rancher said. Maybe we ought to do the same. Slowly, reluctantly, the mood in the room began to shift. Not everyone was convinced, but enough men looked uncertain that Vivian knew she'd bought Creed at least a little time. Elias stared at her, his expression unreadable. You're done, he said quietly. Pack your things. I want you gone by morning. Vivian's heart sank, but she nodded. I understand. She left the saloon and rode back to the ranch through darkness that felt absolute. She'd known this was coming, known it the moment she decided to speak. But knowing didn't make it easier. When she reached her room, she sat on the bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of grief. Then she started packing. She'd saved a little money. Not much, but enough to get her somewhere else. Maybe another town. Maybe back east. She was folding her last dress when she heard the knock on her door. Daniel stood outside, his face tight with anger. You shouldn't have done that, he said. I know. Pa's furious. I know that too. Why'd you do it? Vivian looked at the boy, almost a man really, and decided he deserved honesty. Because it was right, she said. And because I couldn't stand by and watch people I care about do something they'd regret forever. Even if it cost you everything? Even then. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. There's something you should know, he said. About my mother. Vivian waited. She died 3 years ago, but before that she and Pa had a fight, a bad one. She wanted to leave the ranch, said the isolation was killing her. Pa said no. Said this was our home and we weren't running from it. Daniel's voice cracked. She died 6 months later, fever. But I always wondered if she'd still be alive if she'd left when she wanted to. If Pa had just listened to her instead of being so stubborn. Daniel, he's making the same mistake now, Daniel said, being too stubborn to see the truth. And if you hadn't spoken up tonight, I think somebody would have died over it. Maybe Creed. Maybe one of us. He met her eyes. So thank you for doing what was right, even if Pa can't see it yet. He left before Vivian could respond, closing the door softly behind him. She finished packing with tears on her face, uncertain whether they were from sadness or relief or something else entirely. Tomorrow she'd be gone from Red Hollow. But at least tonight she'd told the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to change something. Vivian didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window watching darkness slowly give way to gray dawn, her packed bags beside the door. The house was silent except for the usual creaks and settling sounds, but every noise made her flinch. She kept expecting Elias to appear and order her out immediately, not even waiting for morning. But morning came, and no one knocked on her door. At 6, she heard movement in the kitchen, the boys getting ready for the day. She stayed in her room, unwilling to face them yet. Around 7, footsteps approached down the hall. She braced herself. The knock was soft. Daniel's voice came through the door. Miss Mercer, you still leaving? Vivian opened the door. Daniel stood there with his younger brothers behind him, all three looking uncomfortable. Your father wants me gone, Vivian said. So, yes, he didn't come home last night, Marcus offered. Stayed in town. That surprised her. Did he send word? Just that he'd be back today sometime. Daniel shifted his weight. Look, we don't want you to go. That's kind of you to say. It's not kind. It's true. He glanced at his brothers. We actually learned things with you here. Not like before. Joseph, the youngest, stepped forward. Are you leaving because of what you said about Mr. Creed? Vivian crouched down to his level. I'm leaving because I told the truth. And sometimes the truth makes people angry. But you were trying to help. I know, but help doesn't always look like help to the people who need it. She straightened and looked at Daniel. Take care of your father. And each other. You're good boys. Don't forget that. She picked up her bags and walked past them before they could see her crying. Outside, the morning was already heating up. Vivian loaded her belongings onto the mare Daniel had helped her saddle one last time. She was tightening the straps when she heard horses approaching. Elias rode into the yard with two other men from the meeting. His face was haggard, like he hadn't slept either. He dismounted slowly, moving like his bones hurt. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Mr. Boone." "Where are you headed?" "I don't know yet. Town first, then wherever the stage goes." Elias looked at the packed horse, then at his son standing on the porch, then back at Vivian. "We rode out to Creed's land this morning, early. Looked at that creek split you talked about." Vivian's hand stilled on the saddle strap. "You were right," Elias continued, "about the erosion, the natural redirect. All of it." He rubbed his face. "We've been blaming that man for 2 years over something he didn't do. What are you going to do about it? Talk to him, I guess. If he'll listen, try to work something out about redirecting that eastern channel." Elias paused. "Look, I was angry last night, said things I shouldn't have. You had every right to be angry. Maybe, but I was also wrong." He met her eyes. "You could have kept quiet, made your life easier. Instead, you spoke up, knowing what it would cost you. That takes guts." "Or stupidity," Vivian said quietly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Elias gestured to her bags. "You don't have to leave. You told me to pack my things. I know what I said. I'm saying something different now. If you're willing to stay, we'd like you to stay." Vivian looked at the boys on the porch, all watching with hopeful expressions. Then at Elias, this stubborn man who just admitted he was wrong. Then at her packed bags, everything she owned strapped to a borrowed horse. "I'll stay," she said finally, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "When you talk to Silas Creed, you actually listen to him. No assumptions, no accusations, just two men trying to solve a problem." Elias grimaced. "That might be harder than it sounds. Most worthwhile things are." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll try." Vivian unloaded her bags and carried them back to her room, feeling like she'd just survived something that should have killed her. The boys were delighted, though they tried to hide it behind casual shrugs and mumbled comments about how lessons were better than chores anyway. That afternoon, Elias rode north toward Creed's ranch. He returned 3 hours later looking thoughtful, but not angry, which Vivian took as a good sign. "We talked," he said when she asked. "Actually talked, not just shouted at each other. He's willing to work on redirecting the eastern channel if I help with the labor and materials. Said it's too much for one man." "That sounds fair?" "It is fair, which is what bothers me." Elias sat heavily in a kitchen chair. "I spent 2 years hating that man, building him up in my head as this villain. Turns out he's just a person trying to get by, same as me." "Most villains are," Vivian said. Over the next 2 weeks, a strange thing happened in Red Hollow. The ranchers who'd been ready to run Silas Creed out of the valley started working alongside him to fix the creek problem. It wasn't easy. There were still hard feelings, still mistrust. But slowly, grudgingly, something like cooperation emerged. Vivian watched it happen from a distance, teaching the boys their lessons and trying not to think too much about the man at the center of it all. But she thought about him anyway. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when she said she believed him, like he'd forgotten people could do that. She thought about his voice when he said he wasn't a good man and the way he'd meant it completely. And she wondered what it would be like to know someone that honest. The wondering became harder to ignore when, 3 weeks after the meeting, Daniel found her in the garden and said, "There's someone here to see you." Vivian looked up from the tomato plant she'd been trying to coax into producing. "Who?" "Mr. Creed." Her heart did something complicated. "What does he want?" "Didn't say, just asked if you were here." Vivian stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Silas Creed stood in the front yard, holding his hat and looking deeply uncomfortable. His horse waited behind him, saddled but ground-tied. "Mr. Creed," Vivian said. "Miss Mercer." He shifted his weight. "I won't take up much of your time. Just wanted to say thank you for what you did at that meeting. You heard about that?" "Boone told me when we were working on the creek." He turned his hat in his hands. You didn't have to speak up for me, especially not when it cost you something. It was the right thing to do. Still, most people wouldn't have. He paused. I'm not good at this. Talking to people, expressing gratitude, any of it. You're doing fine. Am I? He almost smiled. I brought you something, payment for the favor. He walked to his horse and returned with a cloth-wrapped package. Inside were 3 books, real books, not the cheap dime novels that made up most of Red Hollow's reading material. Quality bindings, good paper. Vivian caught her breath. Where did you get these? Ordered them from Santa Fe. Took 3 weeks to arrive. Wasn't sure what you'd like, so I got different kinds. She looked at the titles. Poetry. Philosophy. A novel by an author she'd mentioned loving once in passing, though she couldn't remember when or to whom. How did you know I liked Dickens? Daniel mentioned it. Said you'd been reading Great Expectations to the boys. He'd asked Daniel about her. The realization sent warmth through her chest. This is too much, Vivian said. It's not enough, but it's what I could manage. Put his hat back on. Anyway, that's all I came to say. Thank you. He started to turn away. Vivian spoke without thinking. Wait. He stopped. Would you like some water, coffee, if we have any? It's a long ride back. Creed looked at her for a long moment. Your employer might not appreciate me staying. Elias is in town, and even if he weren't, I can offer hospitality to whomever I choose. Something shifted in his expression. Then yes, coffee would be good. They sat on the porch, drinking bitter coffee from tin cups, and talked. Actually talked, the way Vivian hadn't talked to anyone since arriving in Red Hollow, about books and ideas and the kind of deep subjects that frontier life usually didn't leave room for. Creed was smarter than he pretended. Self-educated from books he'd collected over years, reading by lamplight after 16-hour days of ranch work. He had opinions on everything from politics to poetry, and he didn't soften them to be agreeable. Most people think philosophy is useless out here, he said at one point. But I figure if you're going to spend your life working yourself into an early grave, you ought to at least wonder why you're doing it. And have you found an answer? Not yet, but I'm still reading. Vivian laughed, surprising herself. When was the last time she'd laughed? They talked until the coffee was gone and the sun had moved halfway across the sky. Finally, reluctantly, Creed stood. I should go. Work doesn't do itself. Thank you for the books. Thank you for the conversation. He paused. I don't get much of that. Conversation, I mean, people talking to me instead of at me. Then you should come back, Vivian said. The words came out before she could stop them. For conversation, I mean, if you want. Creed looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'd like that. He rode away, and Vivian stood on the porch holding 3 books and feeling like something had shifted in her world. Daniel appeared from inside the house. You like him? It wasn't a question. Don't be ridiculous, Vivian said. I'm not. You were smiling the whole time you were talking to him. I haven't seen you smile like that before. We were discussing literature. Sure. Daniel grinned. Literature. Vivian wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because the boy was right. She had been smiling, and more than that, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Interested, engaged, alive. Over the following weeks, Silas Creed found reasons to stop by the Boone Ranch with increasing frequency. Sometimes he brought things, fresh meat from a hunting trip, vegetables from his garden, once a repaired saddle that Elias had mentioned needed fixing. Sometimes he just appeared and asked if Vivian wanted to ride out and see how the creek work was progressing. She always said yes. They'd ride to the creek and walk along its banks, ostensibly checking the redirected flow, but actually just talking about everything and nothing, about the lives they'd left behind, her in Philadelphia, him in a childhood he didn't like discussing, about what they wanted from life, though neither of them had clear answers. I used to think I wanted respect, Creed said one afternoon, sitting on a rock beside the now healthy southern fork of the creek. Figured if I worked hard enough, built something solid enough, people would have to acknowledge it. And now? Now I think respect's overrated. I'd settle for being left alone. Would you? Vivian asked. Really? He looked at her. Why do you ask? Because you're here, talking to me, which is the opposite of being left alone. A smile tugged at his mouth. Maybe I make exceptions for interesting people. Am I interesting? You stood up in a room full of angry men and told them they were wrong, then stayed in town even after it nearly cost you everything. Yeah, I'd say you're interesting. Vivian felt heat in her face. I just said what needed saying. Most people never do. They're too afraid. You don't seem afraid of much. I'm afraid of plenty, Creed said quietly. I'm just better at hiding it. These conversations left Vivian feeling unsteady, like the ground beneath her feet had turned uncertain. She'd come to Red Hollow expecting to teach children and stay out of trouble. Instead, she'd found herself in the middle of a water dispute, nearly lost her job, and was now spending her free time with a man the entire valley had feared 6 weeks ago. Elias noticed, of course. You and Creed seem to be spending a lot of time together, he commented one evening. We're friends, Vivian said. Friends. Elias gave her a look. That what we're calling it? What else would we call it? Well, in my experience, when a man rides 5 miles out of his way 3 times a week to talk to a woman, he's usually got more than friendship in mind. Vivian felt her face heat again. He's teaching me about the land, the valley, things I need to know. Uh-huh. Elias didn't look convinced. Just be careful. Creed's not a bad man, but he's a hard one. Been alone too long. Might not be capable of much softness. I don't need softness. Everyone needs softness, Miss Mercer, even people who think they don't. But Vivian wasn't sure that was true. She'd had softness before. Gentle men with good manners and careful words. They'd bored her to tears. Silas Creed didn't bore her. He challenged her, made her think, looked at her like she was worth paying attention to, not just a decoration to be admired. That was worth more than softness. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. They'd ridden out to check the creek one afternoon in early June. The redirection work was complete, and water now flowed strong and steady through both Creed's land and Boone's. The drought hadn't broken, but at least the immediate crisis had passed. It's working, Vivian said, watching the water move. It is. Creed stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Thanks to you. I didn't do the work. You did the hard part, getting people to listen. They walked along the bank in comfortable silence. Vivian had stopped trying to fill every quiet moment with words. Creed appreciated silence, and she'd learned to appreciate it with him. Can I ask you something? He said after a while. Of course. Why did you really come to Red Hollow? The truth, not the polite version. Vivian considered lying, then decided he deserved better. My father died and left me with nothing but debts. I had no family, no prospects, no options. When Elias's letter arrived offering work, I took it because it was the only choice I had. You could have remarried. Pretty woman like you, educated, probably had offers. I had offers. All from men who wanted a housekeeper or a decoration, none who wanted a partner. Their loss. The simple certainty in his voice made her throat tight. What about you? She asked. Why did you come here? Creed was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I grew up poor, real poor. The kind where you don't eat some days because there's nothing to eat. My father drank. My mother died when I was 12. I left at 15 and spent 10 years doing every kind of hard labor you can imagine. Saved every penny. When I finally had enough to buy land, I came here and swore I'd never be poor again. And you're not. No, but I'm not much else either. He looked at her. Until recently. Her heart beat too fast. What changed recently? You showed up. They stood facing each other beside the creek, and Vivian felt the moment stretch out, full of possibility and risk. Silas, I know I'm not easy, he interrupted. I know I'm rough and stubborn, and probably impossible to live with, but I'm honest, and I'm here, and I... He stopped, struggling with words. I care about you, more than I probably should. Vivian's breath caught. You care about me. Yes. Just care? He looked at her like she'd asked him to jump off a cliff. I don't know the right words for this. Never learned them. But whatever you call it when you can't stop thinking about someone, when you look forward to seeing them more than anything else in your day, when the thought of them leaving makes you feel like you're drowning, that's what I feel. That's usually called love, Vivian whispered. Then I guess that's what it is. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. For a moment, Creed froze. Then his arms came around her and he kissed her back with an intensity that made her knees weak. It wasn't polite or practiced. It was raw and real, absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Creed rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not gentle," he said. "I'm not easy. I can't promise you comfort or safety or any of the things a woman's supposed to want." "Good," Vivian said, "because I never asked for gentle. I asked for someone true." His arms tightened around her. "I can be that. I can be true." "I know." They stood there beside the creek, holding each other while the water flowed past, and Vivian felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. Hope. News traveled fast in Red Hollow. By the next morning, everyone knew that Vivian Mercer and Silas Creed were courting. The reaction was mixed. Some people thought it was romantic. Others thought Vivian had lost her mind. A few muttered darkly about how Creed had probably manipulated her somehow. Elias took it better than Vivian expected. "You sure about this?" he asked when she confirmed the rumors. "As sure as I've been about anything. He's not an easy man." "I'm not an easy woman." Elias almost smiled. "No, I suppose you're not." He paused. "He treats you right?" "Better than right." "Then I guess that's what matters." He headed toward the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Miss Mercer, I think you're good for him. Man's been alone too long. Needed someone to remind him what living's actually for." After he left, Daniel appeared. "So you really do like him?" "I really do." "Good. He's better than the idiots in town who've been sniffing around." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware anyone was sniffing around." "Then you're not very observant. Marcus counted 4 men who've asked Pa about you. He told them all you weren't interested." He was right. That Sunday, Silas came to dinner. It was awkward at first. 6 years of bad blood couldn't be erased in one meal, but slowly, over roast chicken and potatoes, the tension eased. Silas and Elias found common ground in complaints about cattle prices and weather. The boys asked Silas questions about tracking and hunting. By the time dessert arrived, it almost felt normal. After dinner, Silas and Vivian walked out to the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. "That wasn't as terrible as I expected," Silas said. "High praise." "I mean it. They didn't throw me out. That's progress." Vivian took his hand. "They're getting to know you, the real you, not the story they invented." "And what happens when the real me disappoints them?" "Then they'll learn that people are complicated. That's not a bad lesson." He looked down at their joined hands. "I'm not used to this. Having people, being part of things." "I know. What if I'm not good at it?" "Then you'll practice. That's what people do." He pulled her closer. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's possible." She looked up at him. "You survived everything else that tried to kill you. You'll survive this too." "What if I don't want to just survive anymore?" "Then live," Vivian said. "Really live. With me." He kissed her as the sun dropped below the horizon, and Vivian felt the last of her walls come down. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Silas started leaving books at the fence post that marked the border between Boone's land and his own. Small treasures he'd found or ordered. Sometimes he'd include notes, just a few words explaining why he'd chosen that particular volume. Vivian wrote back. Long letters about what she was reading, what she was thinking, what she hoped for. She left them at the same fence post, and they'd disappear within hours. It became their private language, a way of talking about things too big or too fragile for spoken words. One evening, Vivian found a copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass with a passage marked, "I am large, I contain multitudes." The note beneath read, "This made me think of you, how you're more than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself sometimes." She stood there with the book in her hands, tears on her face, and realized she was completely in love with him. The realization should have scared her. Instead, it felt like coming home. When Silas arrived the next day, she met him at the fence post. "I got your note," she said. And I love you too." His expression cracked open. "I didn't say..." "You didn't have to. The books say it, the notes say it, the way you look at me says it." She stepped closer. "I'm saying it back. I love you, Silas Creed. All the complicated, difficult, stubborn parts of you." He kissed her like a man who'd been drowning and just found air. "I don't deserve you." he said when they broke apart. Probably not. I don't deserve you either. Good thing we're not keeping score. That night, lying in bed, Vivian thought about the path that had brought her here. All the losses, the failures, the desperate choices that had landed her in Red Hollow with nothing but $43 and uncertainty. If someone had told her 6 months ago that she'd fall in love in this harsh place, she would have laughed. But here she was, in love with a man the whole valley had feared, building something real out of broken pieces and honest words. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It was better. The news that Silas Creed and Vivian Mercer were in love spread through Red Hollow like fire through dry grass. Within a week, it was all anyone talked about. The feared rancher and the educated woman from Philadelphia. Most people didn't know what to make of it, but Vivian didn't care what they made of it. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to be. The trouble started on a Thursday in late June when 3 men rode onto Creed's property with an offer to buy his land. Vivian was there when they arrived, helping Silas mend a section of fence that had come down in the previous night's wind. She recognized one of the men from town, a land speculator named Harrison, who'd been buying up properties along the creek. "Mr. Creed," Harrison said, not bothering to dismount, "I'll get straight to it. I'm offering $5,000 for your land, cash. You can be out by month's end." Silas didn't look up from the fence post he was hammering. "Not selling." "You haven't heard my full offer." "Don't need to. Land's not for sale." Harrison's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. That's good money for this amount of acreage." "Then offer it to someone who wants to sell." Silas straightened, hammer still in hand. "I don't." "Think about it carefully, Creed. A man in your position, alone out here, no real ties to the community. Seems like you'd want to take advantage of a generous offer when it comes along." The threat wasn't even thinly veiled. Vivian stepped forward before Silas could respond. He said, "No, Mr. Harrison. I believe that's clear enough even for someone with your limited comprehension." Harrison's eyes shifted to her, and something ugly crossed his face. "Miss Mercer, didn't see you there. Tell me, does Elias Boone know you're spending your days playing house with the local hermit?" "What I do with my time is none of your concern." "It's everyone's concern when a woman of your education throws herself away on a man like this." Harrison jerked his chin toward Silas. "Though I suppose desperation makes people do strange things." Silas moved so fast Vivian barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had Harrison's horse by the bridle, his face level with the mounted man's. "You can insult me all you want," Silas said quietly. "I don't care. But you speak to her with respect or you leave. Those are your options." Harrison's hand moved toward his belt. The 2 men with him shifted in their saddles. "Don't," Vivian said sharply. "Whatever you're thinking, don't do it." For a long moment nobody moved. Then Harrison jerked his reins free and backed his horse up. "You're making enemies, Creed, both of you. Remember that when things get difficult." They rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Silas stood watching until they disappeared, his jaw tight with anger. "You shouldn't have spoken up like that." "Why not?" "Because now they know you're with me, really with me. That makes you a target." "I was already a target the moment I defended you at that meeting." "This is different." He turned to face her. "Harrison's not just some angry rancher. He's connected, has money, influence. If he decides to make trouble for us, then we'll handle it," Vivian interrupted. "Together. You don't understand what you're getting into." "Don't I?" She stepped closer. "I've watched you stand alone against this whole valley. I've seen what it cost you. You think I'm going to abandon you the moment things get hard? I think you should consider what you're risking." "I already have. And I chose you anyway." Something in his expression softened. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You're stubborn," he said. "So are you. We're well matched." He kissed her forehead, and for a moment the world felt right again. But Harrison's visit cast a shadow over the following days. Vivian noticed people in town treating her differently, some with pity, some with disapproval. A few women she'd thought were friendly suddenly had nothing to say to her. "Let them talk," Elias said when she mentioned it. "Small minds need something to occupy themselves." "It doesn't bother you that I'm courting Silas?" "Bothered me more when I thought he was my enemy. Now I know better." Elias looked at her seriously. "You happy?" "Yes." "Then that's what matters. Though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. Harrison's dangerous when he doesn't get what he wants. Can handle him. Maybe, but can you? The question stayed with Vivian. She'd handled difficult men before. Her father's creditors, the lawyers who'd picked apart his estate, the supposed friends who'd vanished the moment money got tight. But this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. She was still thinking about it that Sunday when Silas appeared at the Boone Ranch with a wagon loaded with supplies. "What's all this?" she asked. "Building materials, lumber, nails, shingles." He climbed down from the wagon seat. "I'm expanding the house, adding rooms." "Why?" He looked at her like she'd asked why the sun rose. "Because I want you to marry me, and my house barely fits one person, let alone two." Vivian's breath caught. "That's not a proposal, isn't it?" A proposal usually involves asking. Silas took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not good at this. The pretty words, the romance, but I know what I want, and what I want is you, in my house, in my life, permanently." "You're right," Vivian said. "You're terrible at this." "I know." "But yes." He looked up sharply. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you, despite that being possibly the worst proposal in human history." Relief and joy flooded his face. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, actually laughing, a sound Vivian had heard maybe twice before. "When?" he asked when he set her down. "When what?" "When will you marry me?" "I don't know. We should probably wait a bit. Make sure people are used to the idea." "No." "No?" "I've waited long enough for good things. I'm not waiting anymore." He cupped her face in his hands. "Marry me soon. This month. Next month. Soon." Vivian thought about all the reasons they should wait. The gossip. Harrison's threats. The fact that they'd only known each other a few months. But then she looked at Silas's face and realized she didn't care about any of it. "Next month," she said. "Early August, before the heat gets worse." August. He kissed her, and Vivian felt the last of her hesitation dissolve. They were getting married. The town reacted exactly as Vivian expected. Half the population thought it was too fast, too reckless. The other half was just glad Silas Creed was finally joining civilized society. And a small group, mostly the women Vivian had helped when they needed reading or writing or just someone to talk to, was genuinely happy for her. "You deserve this," said Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house. "After everything you've been through." "You barely know what I've been through." "Don't need to know details to recognize someone who's survived hard times." Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. "That man of yours, he's good. Rough, yes, but good underneath. You'll do well together." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur. Vivian continued teaching the Boone boys while Silas worked on expanding his house. She rode up to visit him most afternoons, bringing food and watching as the new rooms took shape. "This will be our bedroom," he said one day, showing her a space that was still just framed walls and open sky. "Faces east so we'll get morning light." "It's perfect. And this room," he led her to another section. "I thought for a library. You've got all those books. They need a proper home." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "You're building me a library? You need somewhere to keep all the books I'm going to give you." She kissed him hard, tasting sawdust and sweat and the promise of a future she'd stopped believing in. But not everything was perfect. One evening in late July, Vivian rode home from Silas's ranch to find Elias waiting for her with a grim expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Harrison came by today, made some comments about Silas. About you." Elias's jaw was tight. "Implied that Creed was taking advantage of you, that someone should intervene." "That's ridiculous." "I know it's ridiculous, but Harrison's stirring up trouble, getting people to question Creed's motives, suggesting he's only marrying you to gain respectability, or to get closer to my land, or—" He stopped. "It's all garbage, but people listen to him." "Let them listen. It doesn't change anything. It changes how people treat you, how they treat both of you." Elias looked at her seriously. "I'm not saying don't marry him. I'm saying be prepared for it to be harder than you think." Vivian thought about that conversation later that night, lying in bed and listening to the wind. Marriage to Silas would make her life harder in some ways. The gossip, the suspicion, the constant judgment from people who thought they knew better. But it would also make her life better in every way that mattered. She'd rather have hard and honest than easy and empty. The day before the wedding, Vivian rode up to Silas's ranch one last time as an unmarried woman. The house was nearly finished now, still rough around the edges, but solid and real. He'd hung a swing on the front porch, built shelves in the library, planted flowers near the entrance. "You planted flowers," she said. "You like flowers." "I do, but you hate gardening." "I don't hate it that much." He pulled her close. "Tomorrow, you'll be my wife." Getting nervous? Terrified. "Good, so am I." They sat on the porch swing, watching the sun set over the valley. The land stretched out in all directions, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. "Are you sure about this?" Silas asked quietly. "Really sure? Because once we're married, people won't let you forget it. They'll use it against you every chance they get." "I know." "And you're still willing?" "I'm not willing," Vivian said. "I'm eager. There's a difference." He turned to look at her. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why me? You could have had easier, softer, men who know how to say pretty things and make you comfortable." "Because I don't want comfortable," Vivian said. "I want true, and you're the truest person I've ever met." His eyes were bright in the fading light. "I love you." "I know. You show me every day." "I'm not always going to be easy to love." "Neither am I." "What if I disappoint you?" "Then you'll disappoint me, and we'll work through it." She took his hand. "That's what marriage is, isn't it? Choosing someone and then choosing them again every day, even when it's hard. I've never been married. Don't know if I'll be any good at it." "Then we'll learn together." They sat in silence as darkness fell, holding hands and watching stars emerge one by one above the valley. The wedding took place on a Saturday in early August in the small church at the center of Red Hollow. Vivian wore a simple dress she'd made herself from fabric Mrs. Chen had helped her choose. Silas wore what was probably his only good shirt, cleaned and pressed within an inch of its life. The church was more crowded than Vivian expected. The Boone family, of course. Several ranchers who'd worked with Silas on the creek project. Townspeople who were curious or supportive or just wanted to witness the spectacle. Even a few people who clearly disapproved but came anyway because weddings were rare entertainment in a place like Red Hollow. Harrison didn't come. Neither did several of his associates. Their absence felt like a statement. Vivian didn't care. She walked down the aisle with Elias at her side. He'd offered to give her away when she mentioned having no family, and focused entirely on Silas waiting at the front. He looked terrified and determined in equal measure. The ceremony was brief. They exchanged vows that were probably meant to be romantic, but came out halting and awkward because neither of them was comfortable with public declarations. But when Silas said "I do" and slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, his hand was steady. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said. Silas kissed her like they were the only two people in the building. Vivian heard someone gasp, someone else laugh, but she didn't care. She was married, to a man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. The reception was held in the church hall. Someone had organized food and music, though Vivian couldn't remember who. People came through a receiving line to offer congratulations or warnings disguised as advice. "He's a lucky man," more than one person said. "She's a brave woman," others whispered. Vivian smiled through all of it, Silas's hand solid and warm in hers. The first real test came when it was time for the first dance. Silas looked at the cleared space like it was a gallows. "I don't dance," he muttered. "I know. I'm going to embarrass you." "Impossible." "Vivian, just hold me and move," she said. "That's all dancing is." They moved onto the floor as someone started playing a waltz on a badly tuned piano. Silas held her stiffly at first, clearly counting steps in his head. But gradually he relaxed, and they found a rhythm that wasn't exactly graceful, but was theirs. "This isn't so bad," he said after a while. "Told you." "Still hate it." "I know. Thank you for doing it anyway." Other couples joined them on the floor. Elias danced with Mrs. Chen. Daniel convinced a blushing girl from town to join him. The room filled with music and laughter and the sound of people enjoying themselves. Then the door opened and Harrison walked in with two of his men. The music didn't stop immediately, but the atmosphere changed. People noticed. Conversations faltered. Silas's hand tightened on Vivian's waist. Harrison crossed the room toward them, his expression pleasant but his eyes cold. "Congratulations," he said. "Quite the event." "Thank you," Vivian said when Silas didn't respond. "I wanted to offer a gift, a wedding present, if you will." "That's not necessary." "I insist." Harrison pulled a folded paper from his coat. "A contract. For the purchase of your combined properties, yours and Creed's. I'm offering $8,000 for both parcels. More than fair, I think." Silas took the paper and tore it in half without looking at it. "We're not selling," he said. "You should reconsider. It's a generous offer." "It's insulting. Now leave." Harrison's pleasant expression cracked. "You're making a mistake, Creed. Both of you. I'm trying to be reasonable." "You're trying to intimidate us at our wedding," Vivian cut in. "There's nothing reasonable about that. I'm offering you a way out before things get complicated." "Things are already complicated," Silas said, "but there are complications. Now get out of my wife's reception." The room had gone completely silent, everyone watching, waiting to see what would happen. Harrison looked around at all the faces, calculating. Then he smiled, and it was worse than his anger. "Enjoy your celebration," he said, "while it lasts." He left with his men, and slowly the music started again. But the joy had leaked out of the evening. People began making excuses to leave. Within an hour, the hall was mostly empty. "I'm sorry," Silas said as they cleaned up. "For what?" "Ruining your wedding." "You didn't ruin anything." "Harrison did." Vivian picked up scattered plates. "And I don't care. The important part already happened. We're married." "You deserve better than this, than threats on what should be a happy day." "I deserve you," Vivian said firmly. "Everything else is just noise." They finished cleaning in silence, helped by the few remaining guests. Finally, as midnight approached, they climbed into Silas's wagon for the ride back to his ranch. Their ranch now. Their home. The house looked different in the moonlight. Larger somehow. More real. Silas helped Vivian down from the wagon and then just stood there, looking uncertain. "What?" she asked. "I'm supposed to carry you over the threshold." "Says who?" "It's traditional." "Since when do you care about traditional?" "Since I want to do this right." Before she could argue, he picked her up. She laughed, startled, and he carried her through the door into the house he'd built for them. Inside, everything was clean and ready. He'd set up the bedroom with furniture ordered from Santa Fe. The library shelves were waiting for books. The kitchen had supplies. He'd thought of everything. "It's not much," Silas said, setting her down. "It's perfect. I'll make it better. Add more, whatever you want." "I want you to stop apologizing for what you've built here." Vivian turned to face him. "This house, this life, it's more than I ever hoped for." He kissed her then, deeply, and Vivian felt the last piece of the wall around her heart crumble completely. They were married, they were home, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The next morning, Vivian woke to sunlight streaming through the east-facing window Silas had positioned specifically to catch the dawn. He was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen. She could smell coffee. She got dressed and found him outside, staring at the fence line to the north. "What's wrong?" she asked. "That fence was intact yesterday." Vivian looked. Several posts had been knocked down, wire cut and scattered. "Could have been cattle," she said, though she didn't believe it. "Cattle don't cut wire that clean." Silas's jaw was tight. "This is a message." "From Harrison." "Probably, or someone he hired." They spent the morning repairing the damage. It wasn't extensive, but it was deliberate. A warning that Harrison could reach them whenever he wanted. "This is going to keep happening," Vivian said as they worked. "He's not going to stop." "I know." "So what do we do?" Silas hammered another post into place. "We keep going, keep building, keep living. That's all we can do." "And when he escalates?" "Then we deal with it." He looked at her. Together. That afternoon, they rode into town for supplies. People stared more than usual. Some offered tentative congratulations on the marriage. Others just watched with expressions Vivian couldn't read. At the general store, the owner was unusually quiet as he filled their order. "Something wrong, Mr. Peters?" Vivian asked. "No, ma'am, just—" He hesitated. "Just be careful is all." Harrison's been talking, saying things about you and Creed, getting people worked up again. What kind of things? The Creed married you to get access to Boone's water rights, that you're being used, that the whole thing is a scheme to control the creek. Vivian felt anger rise hot in her chest. That's absurd. I know it is, but people believe what they want to believe. Peters handed over the wrapped supplies. Just watch yourselves. On the ride back, Silas was quiet, too quiet. Don't, Vivian said. Don't what? Don't blame yourself. Harrison's spreading lies because the truth doesn't fit his plans. That's not on you. It's on me that you have to deal with it. I chose this. I chose you. If I have to deal with some gossip and Harrison's schemes, then that's part of the package. She reached over and took his hand. I'm not fragile, Silas. I won't break. I know you won't. But you shouldn't have to be strong all the time either. Then we'll take turns, Vivian said. You be strong when I can't be. I'll be strong when you can't be. That's what partners do. He looked at her with something like wonder. How did I get this lucky? You didn't. I'm the lucky one. We could argue about this for hours. Probably, Vivian agreed, but I'd win. That night, lying in bed with Silas's arm around her, Vivian thought about luck and choice and the difference between the two. She hadn't been lucky when her father died, hadn't been lucky when she arrived in Red Hollow with almost nothing, but she'd been smart. She'd made choices, and those choices had led her here, to this bed, with this man, building this life. That wasn't luck. That was something better. Outside, the wind moved through the valley, carrying the promise of storms that might or might not come. Vivian closed her eyes and listened to Silas breathe beside her, steady and real. Whatever Harrison threw at them, whatever the valley tried to take, they would survive it, because they had each other. And in this harsh, unforgiving country, that was more valuable than water. The harassment started small. More cut fences, cattle driven onto their property in the middle of the night, trampling the garden Vivian had spent weeks nurturing. Supplies they'd ordered from Santa Fe mysteriously delayed or lost. Nothing big enough to bring the law into it, but enough to make life difficult. Silas handled it with the same grim determination he applied to everything else. He fixed what was broken, replaced what was ruined, and refused to give Harrison the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. But Vivian saw the toll it took, the way he slept lighter, waking at every sound, the tension in his shoulders that never quite left, the careful way he checked the property each morning, looking for new damage. We could leave, she said one night in September, 3 weeks after someone had poisoned their well and they'd spent 2 days hauling water from the creek. Sell to someone else, not Harrison, but someone. Start over somewhere new. Silas looked at her like she'd suggested they burn the house down. This is our home. Home is wherever we are together. No! His voice was firm. Home is what we build, what we fight for. If we run now, Harrison wins, and worse, we prove him right, that we're not strong enough to hold on to what's ours. I don't care about proving anything to Harrison. I do. He took her hands. I spent my whole life being pushed around, told I wasn't good enough, strong enough, worthy of anything. I'm not doing that anymore. Not for him. Not for anyone. Vivian understood that, but understanding didn't make it easier to watch her husband exhaust himself fighting a war that seemed designed to have no winner. She tried helping in other ways. She started teaching more children in town, not just the Boone boys. Word spread that Mrs. Creed was offering lessons for anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of ability to pay. Parents started sending their kids to the ranch 3 afternoons a week. It gave Vivian purpose beyond just surviving Harrison's campaign. And it did something else too. It reminded the valley that she and Silas were part of the community, not outsiders trying to take something that didn't belong to them. You're good at this, Silas said one afternoon, watching her work with a group of 6 children of varying ages. Teaching, I mean. It's easier than ranching. Don't sell yourself short. You're making a difference. These kids wouldn't learn otherwise. Their parents could teach them. Most of their parents can barely read themselves. He leaned against the doorframe. What you're doing matters. The words settled warm in her chest. Silas wasn't generous with praise, which made it mean more when it came. But the good moments were increasingly outnumbered by hard ones. In October, someone started a rumor that Silas had been rustling cattle from neighboring ranches. It wasn't true. Vivian could account for every head of cattle they owned, and Silas kept meticulous records. But the rumor spread anyway. Elias helped shut it down by vouching for Silas publicly, but the damage was done. People looked at them differently. The trust they'd been building crumbled. Silas admitted one night, sitting on the porch and staring out at the dark valley. Not physically, just tired of fighting. Vivian sat beside him, taking his hand. I know. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me? Never. Not even when things are like this? Especially not when things are like this. She squeezed his fingers. You think I married you for easy? I knew what I was getting into. You couldn't have known it would be this hard. Maybe not exactly this, but I knew it wouldn't be simple. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I married you because you're worth fighting for. This life is worth fighting for. He was quiet for a long moment, then, I love you. I know. I'm not always good at showing it. You show it every day, in 100 small ways. She lifted her head to look at him. You built me a library. You fix my mistakes without complaining. You listen when I talk about books you don't care about. That's love. Is it enough? It's everything. November brought the first real crisis. Vivian woke one morning feeling nauseated, barely making it outside before she was sick. Silas found her leaning against the porch railing, pale and shaking. What's wrong? His voice was sharp with worry. I don't know, something I ate, maybe. But it happened again the next morning, and the next. After a week of this, Mrs. Chen pulled Vivian aside at church and asked a question that made her heart stop. When was your last monthly? Vivian thought back. She'd been so busy, so focused on everything else, that she hadn't paid attention. I'm not sure. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. You might want to see the doctor, dear, just to be certain. The doctor confirmed it 3 days later. Vivian was pregnant. About 2 months along, he estimated. She sat in the examination room after he left, trying to process the information. A baby. She was going to have a baby. The joy hit first. Pure, unexpected joy. She and Silas were going to be parents. Then came the fear. They were barely holding their own life together. How could they possibly raise a child in the middle of this chaos? She rode home slowly, trying to figure out how to tell Silas. He was working on the barn roof when she arrived, and he climbed down when he saw her face. What did the doctor say? I'm pregnant. The hammer fell from his hand. He just stared at her, expression completely blank. Silas? Say something. You're sure? The doctor's sure. He sat down hard on a pile of lumber, still staring. Vivian's stomach twisted with anxiety. This wasn't the reaction she'd hoped for. Are you upset? She asked. Upset? He looked up at her. No, I'm terrified. That's honest. I don't know how to be a father. My own father was... He stopped, shook his head. I don't have any good examples to follow. Vivian sat beside him. Then we'll figure it out together, same as everything else. What if I'm bad at it? You won't be. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. You're already worried about doing it right. That's what good fathers do. His hand trembled slightly. There's a person in there. There is. Our person. Yes. Slowly, wonder replaced the fear in his expression. We're having a baby. We are. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She felt his shoulders shake and realized he was crying. I'm going to be a father, he said, voice rough. You're going to be a great father. I'm going to try. I swear I'm going to try. They sat there in the dust and sunlight, holding each other while the enormity of it sank in. Everything was about to change. Their quiet life, their careful plans, their two-person world, all of it would be different. But as Vivian felt Silas's arms around her and imagined a child with his dark eyes and her stubborn streak, she found she wasn't afraid. They would figure it out. They always did. The news spread quickly, as news always did in Red Hollow. The reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them. Others muttered about bringing a child into such an unstable situation. Harrison, predictably, found a way to use it against them. Creed's trapped her now, she overheard someone saying in town. Got her pregnant, so she can't leave. Vivian had marched up to the speaker, a rancher named Sullivan, and set him straight in language that made his ears turn red. My husband didn't trap me. I chose this. I choose him. And I choose this child. If that's too complicated for you to understand, that's your failing, not mine. Daniel, who'd been shopping nearby, grinned as she stormed past. You tell him, Mrs. Creed. But the comments bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She'd spent so much energy fighting for people to see Silas clearly, and now they were twisting even this, something beautiful and precious, into something ugly. Ignore them, Silas said when she told him. People like that, they need someone to look down on. Makes them feel better about their own failures. I don't want our child growing up hearing those kinds of things about us. Then we make sure our child knows the truth, that we chose each other, that we chose this life, that love isn't always pretty or easy, but it's real. Vivian thought about that often over the following weeks as her body changed and the reality of impending parenthood set in. She was sick most mornings, exhausted by afternoon, and emotional in ways that embarrassed her. Silas handled it with more patience than she expected. He started doing more of the household work without being asked, made sure she ate even when she didn't feel like it, sat with her during the worst of the nausea, rubbing her back and not complaining when she snapped at him. You're being too nice, she said one particularly bad morning. Is that possible? It's suspicious. You're never this accommodating. You're growing a person. Seems like a good reason to be accommodating. She wanted to argue, but ended up crying instead. Silas held her until the storm passed, then made her tea and toast like nothing had happened. The teaching had to stop. Vivian was too tired and sick to handle a classroom full of energetic children, but she started writing lessons for parents to use at home, distributing them through the general store. It wasn't the same as teaching directly, but it was something. December brought snow and a temporary pause in Harrison's harassment. The valley got quiet in winter. Everyone focused on just getting through the cold months. Vivian and Silas settled into a routine that felt almost normal. They spent evenings by the fire, Silas reading aloud from books, while Vivian knitted impossibly small clothes for a baby she couldn't quite believe was real. Sometimes they talked about names, though they never agreed on anything. Sometimes they just sat in silence, comfortable with each other in a way that still surprised Vivian. I never thought I'd have this, Silas said one night. What? Peace. A home. Someone to share it with. He looked at her. I spent so many years alone, I forgot what it felt like to not be. Are you glad that you're not alone anymore? More than I can say. He reached over and took her hand. Even with all the trouble, all the fighting, I'd do it all again for this. For what? This. Right now. You and me and the future sitting right here. Vivian felt the baby move for the first time that night. Just a flutter, barely noticeable. But she grabbed Silas's hand and pressed it to her stomach. Did you feel that? He waited, concentrating. Then his eyes went wide. Was that was our baby. The expression on his face, wonder and fear and love all mixed together, was something Vivian knew she'd remember forever. January brought both a brutal cold snap and unexpected help. Elias showed up one morning with Daniel and Marcus in tow, all of them carrying tools. What's this? Silas asked. Nursery isn't going to build itself, Elias said. Figured you could use some help before the baby comes. Silas looked stunned. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Elias clapped him on the shoulder. Besides, Vivian helped my boys. Time I returned the favor. They worked for 3 days, converting one of the spare rooms into a proper nursery, building a cradle, installing better windows, adding shelves for supplies. By the time they finished, the room looked perfect. Thank you, Vivian said when Elias was leaving. This means more than you know. Your family, Elias said simply. That's what family does. After they left, Vivian stood in the nursery with Silas, both of them looking at the cradle Elias had built. The valley's changing, Silas said quietly. What do you mean? 6 months ago, Elias barely spoke to me. Now he's building furniture for our child. He shook his head. Never thought I'd see that. People can change when they're given reason to. You're the reason. You made them see me differently. I just told the truth. The truth nobody wanted to hear. He pulled her close, careful of her growing stomach. You changed everything, Vivian. My life. This valley. All of it. She leaned into him, feeling the baby move between them. We changed it together. But the peace didn't last. Harrison made his final play. He filed a claim with the territorial government, arguing that Silas's deed to his property was invalid due to a surveying error. If the claim went through, Silas would lose everything. It's nonsense, the lawyer in Santa Fe told them when they made the trip to consult him. The deed is solid, but fighting it will cost money and time. Months, probably. Maybe longer. How much money? Silas asked. The lawyer named a figure that made Vivian's stomach drop. They had savings, but not nearly enough. On the long ride home, neither of them spoke. The baby was due in less than 2 months. They couldn't afford a legal battle right now. But they also couldn't afford to lose the ranch. We'll figure something out, Vivian said finally. How? I don't know yet, but we will. That night, lying in bed with Silas's hand resting protectively on her belly, Vivian made a decision. She'd started this fight by speaking up at that meeting 9 months ago. She'd finish it the same way. She just had to figure out how. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen stopped by a week later with news. Harrison's been buying property all over the valley, she said. Talked to the land office myself. He owns nearly a third of Red Hollow now. Why does that matter? Vivian asked. Because he's planning something big, and I think if people knew about it, they might not be so willing to let him run your husband off his land. What do you mean? Mrs. Chen leaned forward. Harrison's not buying property to ranch it. He's buying it to sell to the railroad. They're planning a route through here, and he's positioning himself to make a fortune. Vivian felt pieces clicking into place. That's why he wants Silas's land. It's right in the path. Exactly. But if the railroad comes through, it changes everything for Red Hollow. More people, more money, more opportunity. People deserve to know what Harrison's really up to. How do I prove it? The land office has records, public records. Anyone can see them. Vivian made the trip to the territorial office the next day, despite Silas's protests about her traveling while pregnant. What she found there confirmed everything Mrs. Chen had suspected. Harrison had been systematically buying up property along a specific corridor, exactly where a railroad would logically run. He'd been doing it quietly, using different names and shell companies, but the pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. She copied down every detail, her hand cramping from hours of writing. Then she rode back to Red Hollow and went straight to the newspaper office. The editor, a man named Thompson, listened to her story with increasing interest. This is a hell of a scoop, he said, but Harrison's got money and influence. Publishing this could get me shut down. Or it could make your paper the most important publication in the territory, Vivian countered. Your choice. Thompson studied her. You're either very brave or very foolish. I've been told they're the same thing. He published the story 3 days later. The reaction was immediate and explosive. People who'd supported Harrison turned on him. The ranchers he'd been manipulating realized they'd been pawns in a larger game. Even some of his own associates distanced themselves. Within a week, Harrison withdrew his claim against Silas's property. Within 2 weeks, he'd left Red Hollow entirely, taking his schemes with him. The valley collectively exhaled. You did it, Silas said when the news reached them. You actually did it. We did it, Vivian corrected. All of us. Everyone who stood up and refused to let him win. But the victory felt hollow. The stress of the past months had taken its toll. Vivian was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The baby was due any day, and she felt completely unprepared. What if I'm a terrible mother? She asked Silas one night. You won't be. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He pulled her close. You fought off land speculators while pregnant. You exposed corruption. You protected our family. You think that same strength won't make you a good mother? Those things are different. Not as different as you think. The baby came 3 weeks later on a bright March morning. The labor was long and brutal, and there were moments when Vivian was certain she wouldn't survive it. But she did. And at the end of it all, she held a squalling, red-faced boy with Silas's dark hair and her stubborn chin. He's perfect, Silas said, looking at his son with complete awe. He's loud, Vivian said, but she was smiling. They named him James, after Vivian's father. Silas had suggested it, knowing how much she still missed him. The first weeks of parenthood were chaos. James cried constantly, slept poorly, and demanded every ounce of energy they had. Vivian had never been so tired in her life. Silas had never looked so lost. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted one night at 3 a.m, holding a screaming James and looking desperate. "Neither do I," Vivian said. "We're figuring it out together." "What if we're doing it wrong?" "Then we'll do it wrong together, and we'll learn." She took James and started the rocking motion that sometimes calmed him. That's all parenting is, I think, just figuring it out as you go. Slowly, impossibly, they found their rhythm. Silas learned to change diapers without flinching. Vivian learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. James learned that crying didn't always get him what he wanted, though he still tried. And through it all, Vivian watched Silas transform into someone she barely recognized. The hard, solitary man who'd pointed a rifle at her 10 months ago now spent hours holding his son, talking to him in a soft voice, showing him the ranch and the valley and everything they'd fought to keep. "You're a good father," she told him one evening, watching him rock James to sleep. "I'm trying." "You're succeeding." He looked at her with such gratitude that her heart hurt. "I never thought I'd get this, any of this." "Neither did I." "We're lucky." "No," Vivian said. "We worked for this. We fought for it. That's not luck." James started crying again, and Silas groaned but stood up to comfort him. Vivian watched them, her husband and her son, and felt a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. This was her life now. Hard and messy and absolutely nothing like what she'd planned. But it was real. It was true. And it was hers. James was 6 months old when the drought finally broke. Rain came in sheets that turned the valley green almost overnight, filling the creek to levels no one had seen in years. Vivian stood on the porch watching water pour from the sky, holding James on her hip while he squealed and reached for the drops. "First real rain he's ever seen," Silas said, joining them. "He likes it. Gets that from you. I prefer being dry." Vivian laughed and shifted James to her other hip. He was getting heavy, growing faster than seemed possible. Every day he looked more like Silas. Same dark eyes, same serious expression when he was studying something new. "The creek's going to flood if this keeps up," Silas observed. "Let it. We could use the water." "Could use a lot of things." He put his arm around her shoulders. "But we've got what matters." It was true. The past 6 months had been exhausting in ways Vivian hadn't imagined possible. James was a terrible sleeper, prone to ear infections, and had recently discovered screaming as his primary form of communication. The ranch work never stopped. Money was tight. Their roof leaked in 2 places. But they had each other. They had their son. They had land that was finally, legally, permanently theirs. Everything else was just details. The teaching started again in May, though different than before. Vivian couldn't manage a full classroom with James, but parents started bringing their children to the ranch 1 or 2 at a time. She'd teach while James napped, or sometimes with him playing on a blanket nearby. "You're building something," Elias said one afternoon when he'd brought Marcus and Joseph for lessons. "Not just teaching kids to read, you're building a real school." "It's not a school, it's just me and whoever shows up." "That's how schools start." He looked around the main room where Vivian had set up a makeshift classroom. "You ever think about making it official? With what money? What building? There's talk in town, people pooling resources. The valley's growing, we need a proper school." Elias paused. "And everyone agrees you should run it." Vivian felt something flutter in her chest. A real school. A permanent position. The kind of stability she'd stopped believing was possible. "I'd have to talk to Silas." "Talk to me about what?" Silas appeared in the doorway, dusty from working in the far pasture. "The town wants to build a school. They want Vivian to teach." Silas looked at her. "What do you want?" "I don't know yet. It would mean regular hours, being away from the ranch, from James. James would be with you. School age eventually, anyway." Silas crossed his arms, thinking. "You miss it, real teaching." "I do," Vivian admitted, "but I'm needed here too." "We'd manage, if it's what you want." That night, after James was asleep and the house was quiet, Vivian and Silas sat on the porch talking through what a real school would mean. The commitment, the responsibility, the ways it would change their already complicated life. "I'm afraid," Vivian said finally. "Of what?" "Of taking on too much. Of failing. Of not being good enough at any of it. Teaching, mothering, being a wife." "You're already doing all of those things." "Barely, and not well." I turned to look at her. "You know that's not true. Some days I'm not sure what's true anymore. I'm so tired, Silas, all the time. And I love James more than anything, but being his mother is harder than I ever imagined. And the ranch needs work I can't help with. And the teaching is the only thing that makes me feel like myself, but I feel guilty every time I do it because it means I'm not doing something else." She hadn't meant to say all that. The words just spilled out, months of exhaustion and doubt pouring free. Silas was quiet for a long moment, then, "You remember what you told me? When I asked if you regretted marrying me." "I said never." "You said you married me for real, not for easy, that you knew it would be hard." He took her hand. "This is the hard part. Figuring out how to be everything we need to be, but we're doing it. Maybe not perfectly, but we're doing it." "What if perfect is what's required?" "It's not. Perfect is impossible. Real is what matters." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "When I married someone who expected me to be." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence while the valley settled into darkness around them. The school became real faster than anyone expected. A group of ranchers donated lumber and land. The Women's Auxiliary organized fundraising. By July, they were breaking ground on a one-room schoolhouse at the edge of Red Hollow. Silas helped with the construction, along with Elias and a dozen other men who'd once considered him an enemy. Vivian watched them work together, sharing tools and jokes and the kind of easy camaraderie that only came from shared purpose. "Your husband's not so bad," she heard one rancher say. "Took you long enough to notice," another replied. The comment made Vivian smile. Silas had been right. The valley was changing, slowly, grudgingly, but changing nonetheless. The schoolhouse was finished in September, just as James was learning to pull himself up on furniture and terrorize everything within reach. Vivian started teaching 3 days a week, bringing James with her. The older students helped watch him while she worked with the younger ones. It was chaotic, beautiful, exactly what she needed. "You look happy," Silas observed one evening when she came home exhausted but smiling. "I am happy. Is that allowed? After everything we've been through? Yeah, I'd say it's allowed." But happiness, Vivian was learning, was never simple. There was always something else, some new challenge or worry or crisis demanding attention. In October, Elias fell ill. Nothing serious at first, just a persistent cough that wouldn't clear. But it got worse, and by November he was bedridden with what the doctor called pneumonia. Vivian and Silas took turns helping with the Boone Ranch, managing work that neither of them had time for. James spent more hours being passed between helpful neighbors than with his own parents. The teaching suffered. Everything suffered. "We can't keep this up," Vivian said after 3 weeks of barely sleeping. "What choice do we have? Elias needs help." "I know, but we're breaking ourselves trying to do everything." Silas rubbed his face, exhaustion written in every line. "What do you suggest?" "I don't know. I just know something has to change." The change came from an unexpected source. Daniel, now 16 and nearly as tall as his father, approached them one evening. "I can manage the ranch," he said. "Pa's ranch, I mean. Marcus and Joseph can help. We know the work." "Your children," Vivian said gently. "I'm 16. Marcus is 14. That's not children, not out here." Daniel stood straighter. "You and Mr. Creed have your own lives, your own work. Let us handle ours." Silas studied the boy. "You sure about this?" "Pa taught us everything he knows. We can do it." And somehow they did. The Boone boys managed their ranch while Elias recovered, making mistakes but learning from them. Vivian and Silas returned to their own routines, exhausted but functional. By December, Elias was back on his feet, weaker than before but alive. He pulled Vivian aside one afternoon. "Thank you," he said, "for everything you and Silas did. You'd have done the same." "Maybe. But I'm grateful anyway." He paused. "I'm getting old, Vivian. This illness made me realize it. I won't be able to run the ranch forever." "You've got years left." "Maybe. But I've been thinking about the future, about what happens to this place when I'm gone. He looked at her seriously. Daniel's a good boy, smart, strong, but he's going to need help, people he can trust. He has his brothers. He'll need more than that. He'll need community, the kind you and Silas helped build here. Vivian understood what he was really saying, that the valley they'd fought for wasn't just about land or water or survival anymore. It was about people taking care of each other, building something that would last beyond any one person's lifetime. We'll be here, she promised, for Daniel, for all of them. Winter settled in hard that year. James celebrated his first birthday during a blizzard that trapped them in the house for 3 days. Vivian made a cake from carefully hoarded ingredients while Silas carved wooden toys from scrap lumber. Can't believe he's already won, Silas said, watching James destroy the cake with both hands. Time moves faster than you think when you're not paying attention. I've been paying attention. I know. Vivian leaned against him. You're a good father, Silas. I hope you know that. I make it up as I go. We all do. That's the secret nobody tells you. James chose that moment to smear frosting in his hair, and they both laughed. A year ago, Vivian couldn't have imagined this moment, this warmth, this family, this life. Now she couldn't imagine anything else. Spring brought news of the railroad. It was really coming, scheduled to reach Red Hollow by fall. The town was already changing in anticipation, new businesses opening, new families arriving. The valley Vivian had first seen as a dusty, desperate outpost was becoming something bigger. Everything's different now, she said to Silas one evening. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet, both maybe. You afraid of the change? A little. We fought so hard for this quiet life. What if we lose it? Silas pulled her close. We'll adapt, same as always. But adapting became harder than Vivian expected. The school grew overcrowded almost overnight. Parents who'd never cared about education suddenly wanted their children prepared for the opportunities a railroad would bring. Vivian went from teaching a dozen students to nearly 30. She needed help. The valley needed a real teacher, someone trained and capable of handling a growing school, someone who wasn't also trying to manage a ranch and raise a child and be a wife. I should quit, she said one night after a particularly overwhelming day. You don't want to quit. Want has nothing to do with it. I'm not doing anyone any favors by being mediocre at everything. You're not mediocre, you're exhausted. There's a difference. What's the solution then? Silas thought about it. We hire someone to help, another teacher, someone who can share the load. With what money? The railroad's bringing money, the town's growing. We figure it out. They did figure it out, though not easily. The town council agreed to fund a second teaching position. A young woman named Sarah arrived from Denver in June, trained and eager and absolutely terrified of frontier life. Is it always this hot? She asked Vivian on her third day. This is mild. Wait until August. Sarah looked horrified, but she stayed. And slowly, she and Vivian developed a partnership that worked. Sarah handled the younger students while Vivian focused on the older ones. They split responsibilities, covered for each other, and gradually built something neither could have managed alone. I like her, Silas said after meeting Sarah. She's got spine. She'll need it out here. She's got you to show her how it's done. Vivian thought about that often over the summer. How much she'd changed since arriving in Red Hollow 2 years ago. She'd come here desperate and alone, willing to take any job that offered survival. Now she was helping shape the valley's future, teaching children who would build the next generation of this community. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd built, piece by difficult piece. The railroad arrived in September 1884, exactly on schedule. The whole valley turned out to watch the first train pull into the new station. Vivian stood with Silas and James, watching the steam engine and thinking about how much had changed. 2 years ago, I rode into this town on a stagecoach with nothing, she said. And now? Now I have everything. Silas took her hand. James, balanced on Silas's hip, grabbed for the steam whistling from the locomotive. No touching, Silas said absently. Train, James shouted, one of maybe 10 words he knew. Yes, that's a train. Train, 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 Vivian laughed, and Silas grimaced but smiled too. This was their life now, loud, chaotic, full of small frustrations and smaller joys. The railroad changed Red Hollow faster than anyone predicted. Within months, the population doubled. New businesses opened. The school outgrew its building and needed expansion. Vivian and Sarah hired a third teacher, then a fourth. "We're building something real here," Sarah said one afternoon. "We are," Vivian agreed. "Does it ever scare you? How fast everything's changing." "Constantly. But being scared doesn't stop it from happening." "How do you handle it?" Vivian thought about the question. "One day at a time. Focus on what you can control. Let go of what you can't. And trust that you're stronger than you think." It was advice she had to remind herself of constantly, because even as the school flourished and the valley prospered, life remained complicated. James turned 2 and became a force of nature, curious, stubborn, and absolutely fearless. He climbed everything, broke everything, and tested every boundary Vivian and Silas set. "Where does he get this energy?" Silas asked one evening after chasing James away from the horses for the third time. "From you." "I was never this wild." "You absolutely were, you just don't remember." Parenthood, Vivian was learning, was an exercise in constant adaptation. Just when you figured out one stage, your child moved to the next. Just when you thought you had a handle on things, everything changed. But there were moments of grace too. James saying his first full sentence, "Mama, read book." The pride on Silas's face when James helped him with simple ranch chores. The way their son looked at both of them like they hung the stars. Those moments made everything else worth it. The second pregnancy caught Vivian by surprise. She'd assumed James would be their only child. They were barely managing as it was. But in March of 1885, the doctor confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks. "Again," Silas said when she told him. "Apparently. How do you feel about it?" "Terrified, excited, exhausted just thinking about it." "That's fair." He pulled her close. "We'll manage." "We always say that." "We always do manage." Their daughter was born in November during the first snowfall of the season. The labor was easier than with James, and the baby, they named her Catherine, after Silas's mother, was quieter, calmer, less demanding. "She's so different from James," Vivian said, holding her newborn daughter. "Thank God for that," Silas replied. "I don't think we could handle 2 of him." James was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to touch her, hold her, help with her. Silas had to watch him constantly to make sure his help didn't become harmful. "Gentle," Silas reminded him for the 100th time. "Baby," James said reverently, patting Catherine's head with surprising care. Watching Silas with both children, Vivian felt something settle in her chest. This man who'd been so certain he'd be a terrible father was actually extraordinary at it. Patient in ways she wasn't. Calm when she was frazzled, present in every moment, even when he was exhausted. "You're thinking too loud," Silas said without looking up from where he was showing James how to properly hold the baby. "Just thinking about how wrong you were." "About what?" "About not being good at this." "At family." He looked at her then, and his expression was soft in a way it only ever was with her and the children. "I had a good teacher." "Liar. You figured it out yourself." "We figured it out together, like everything else." That winter was hard, 2 children under 3, the school demanding her attention, the ranch requiring constant work. There were days Vivian wanted to quit everything and run away to somewhere quiet where nobody needed her for anything. But there were also days when James made her laugh until she cried, when Catherine smiled for the first time, when Silas came in from the cold and wrapped his arms around her like she was the only warmth he needed. Those days made the hard ones bearable. By spring, they'd found a new rhythm. Sarah had taken over more of the teaching duties, leaving Vivian time to focus on administration and the older students. Silas had hired a ranch hand, a young man named Thomas, who was learning the work. "We're delegating," Vivian said one evening. "Is that what we're calling it?" "We're admitting we can't do everything ourselves." "About time," says the man who fought that realization for 2 years. "I'm a slow learner." Vivian laughed, and James mimicked her from across the room, which made Catherine gurgle something that might have been a laugh too. This was their life, messy, imperfect, held together by determination and love, and the sheer stubborn refusal to give up on each other. And it was enough. The 5-year anniversary of Vivian's arrival in Red Hollow came in May of 1887. She marked the date quietly, thinking about the terrified woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach with $43 and no plan beyond survival. That woman felt like a stranger now. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked, finding her on the porch after the children were asleep. "About how much has changed." "Regrets?" "None." "You?" "Not a single one." He sat beside her. "Well, maybe one." "What's that?" "I should have asked you to marry me sooner. Wasted time being afraid." "We had the time we had. Can't change it now." "No, but I can make sure I don't waste any more of it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the valley spread out before them. The creek ran full and healthy, shared peacefully between properties that had once fought over every drop. The town glowed with lamplight from houses and businesses that hadn't existed 5 years ago. The school stood solid and permanent, a testament to what people could build when they worked together. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that night?" Silas asked. "At the meeting?" "Sometimes." "What do you think would have happened?" "Violence, probably. Someone would have died. Maybe you. Maybe one of the ranchers. The valley would have torn itself apart." "But you stopped it." "We stopped it. All of us." Silas was quiet for a moment. "I used to think surviving was enough, that if I just worked hard enough, kept my head down, minded my own business, I'd be fine. Alone, but fine. What changed? You showed up and proved me wrong about everything, about people, about community, about what life could be if I let someone in." He took her hand. "I spent so many years building walls to keep people out. Took you about 5 minutes to knock them all down." "Took longer than 5 minutes." "Not much longer." Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know what I learned?" "What's that?" "That love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone real. Someone who shows up, even when it's hard. Someone who chooses you, over and over, even when easier options exist." "Is that what we did? Chose each other?" "Every single day." They sat there as darkness fell completely, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely place and built something that would outlast them both. A family, a home, a community. James would grow up to take over the ranch, managing it with the same fierce determination his father had shown. Catherine would become a teacher herself, following in Vivian's footsteps and eventually running the school that now served a town of over 300 people. The valley would continue to grow and change, shaped by the railroad and progress and the inevitable march of time. But at its heart would remain the lessons Vivian and Silas had taught it, that community mattered, that honesty mattered, that standing up for what was right mattered even when it cost you everything. Years later, when asked about those early days in Red Hollow, Vivian would struggle to explain it to people who hadn't lived through it, how brutal the land had been, how close they'd come to losing everything, how many times she'd wanted to quit but hadn't, because quitting meant giving up on something worth fighting for. But she'd also tell them about the moment she first saw Silas Creed standing beside that creek, rifle in hand, looking at her like she was either very brave or very foolish. About the books left at fence posts and the conversations that changed everything. About a wedding where their enemies became allies and a community that learned to see past its own fear. And she'd tell them that the greatest battle of her life hadn't been against drought or land speculators or small-minded gossip. It had been finding the courage to live honestly beside someone who demanded nothing less than her complete, imperfect, real self. In the end, that was the only victory that mattered. The woman who'd arrived in Red Hollow with nothing had found everything that counted. Not in comfort or ease or perfect circumstances, but in the daily choice to show up and try and build something lasting with another person equally flawed and equally determined. And in this unforgiving wilderness, in this harsh and beautiful valley, the kind of love was rarer than water, stronger than drought, and more valuable than all the land in the territory. It was the kind of love that changed everything, the kind worth fighting for, the kind that lasted.